All right, sorry for the delay. I'd like to call the November 9th Community Issues Committee to order. I'd like to read the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I have a motion by Councillor Higgin to adopt the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda, Madam Clerk?
No, there are no additions or deletions or amendments to this agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Higgin?
Call for the vote.
Any opposed? There being none, the agenda is adopted. I have a motion by Councillor Campbell to approve the minutes. Councillor Campbell?
Are there any errors or omissions from anyone? If not, I'll call by.
Question's been called. Any opposed? Oh,
Jeff.
sorry. Is
Jeff
that,
Carlson.
Councillor Carlson, do you have your hand up? Your mic is muted.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor. We have not done a roll call for this meeting.
Oh, thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Councillor Campbell.
Here.
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
Councillor Croson.
Present.
Councillor Morrow.
Yeah.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
Acting Mayor Higgin.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Miyashiro.
Here.
Mayor Spearman.
Here.
All present. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Campbell, approval of the minutes.
Call the vote.
Any opposed? There being none, the minutes are approved. First item on the agenda, Municipal Development Plan Review. I don't have my agenda handy, hang on. Ms. Gehring?
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of City Council. Today is our second CIC session focused on MDP engagement, and topics today are housing and the environment. We have three presenters here, three groups, Southern Alberta Environmental Group, Environment Lethbridge, and Build. So they are here today to share their perspectives and thoughts with you, and we'll lead off with the Southern Alberta Environment Group.
Your Worship and City Council. The MDP ICSP begins with a statement: we will continue to work together to ensure that Lethbridge is a leader in environmental stewardship. And that's an important statement to us, and we've been pleased over the last 10 years to see how much City Council has taken this to heart.
Can you identify yourself and which group you're with,
I'm
please?
sorry, it's Brown Barber with the Southern Alberta Group for the Environment, and I'm with Cheryl Bradley as well. Since in the last 10 years, the City Council has established a corporate sustainability manager position to facilitate the implementation of environmental best practices, which has been a very positive move and shows leadership by example. And we've also enjoyed to see the city's support for the excellent work of Environment Lethbridge, for inspiring the community towards actions towards sustainability, and most notably the State of the Environment report, which establishes some environmental benchmarks and indicators for the region. We've also been really pleased to see the city administration also embrace these environmental stewardship goals through a couple of the categories we'd like to see sustained through this review. The sustainable built environment and efficient land use category has action to minimize the urban footprint, to preserve the peri-urban agricultural region surrounding the city, and also a mandate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we've seen that in the city through the pedestrian and cycle-friendly mobility efforts and trying to optimize public transportation and reduce the use of the single occupant vehicle. We'd like to see these principles expanded or embraced in the area redevelopment plans coming up, as well as all new developments in the future. The second category, the sustainable natural environment and efficient use of resources, is also important to us to preserve the biodiversity in the region and conserve our natural areas. And this has been managed by the city by reducing water use, maintaining the riparian areas along the river bottom, and trying to control some of the invasive species through the river valley planning. So we've been involved with the river valley planning efforts, and we see a lot of good movements towards maintaining low impact recreational activities in the region. We also have seen the city put a lot of effort into reducing the waste stream and divert recyclables and organics from the landfill eventually. One thing that SAGE would like to see perhaps in the future NDP through the review is expanding the environmental stewardship to more of a regional context, something like an integrated regional sustainability plan. Most environmental issues aren't isolated within a municipality, so we'd like to see more communications amongst municipalities, particularly in the airshed and the watersheds, in order to preserve the stability and the integrity and the beauty of those regions into the future. As an example, unlike other urban municipalities in Alberta, Lethbridge is not participating actively in an airshed zone. There's provincial airshed zone framework efforts that help to identify air quality challenges in our region, particularly fine particulate matter, ozone, and odor. Another example of more of a regional plan would be something that occurred fairly recently when the Alberta government decided to rescind the coal policy and allow open pit mining in the headwaters. That has an impact on our watershed and our water quality. We were very pleased with Council's decision to send on October 19th to send a letter of concern to the province on the impacts on water quality, particularly the selenium contamination concerns, and also supporting the OWC submission that expresses the concerns to the Joint Review Panel that's currently holding hearings for the Grassy Lake coal project. So in conclusion, being an environmental responsible city is a process that requires long-term commitment to reduce the urban footprint, to reduce waste and diverting it from the landfill, and for the clean air, clean water, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. SAGE would advocate that we maintain an emphasis on environmental stewardship in municipal decision-making, and we will advocate that there be a continuing effort to expand the scope of decision-making to include the watershed and the airshed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berber. Ms. Shepherd?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Miyashiro and members of the Community Issues Committee. I'm very pleased to come here to provide some feedback on the proposed update to the Municipal Development Plan. First off, I was very pleased to see a comprehensive set of priorities, particularly under the environment policy, that have been proposed for the updated MDP. I think, as Brom mentioned, Lethbridge has a wide variety of environmental assets, and so having a policy that reflects that is really important. I wanted to highlight three particular areas of interest for us. The first being climate adaptation. As I think many are aware, climate adaptation and mitigation are critical environmental issues facing not just Lethbridge, but communities around the world. And the city has made some good progress on mitigation over the last few years with the Partners for Climate Protection milestones, the recent greenhouse gas emission reduction target, and the upcoming energy efficiency master plan that the corporate sustainability team is working on. As many of you will know, climate change is a threat multiplier, which means we can't predict single events will be caused by climate change, but that things like severe weather will increase in severity. And, coming out of a weekend storm that was another record-setting storm for Lethbridge, I think we're already starting to see some of those impacts locally. So this makes it doubly important to include climate adaptation in our future planning. Climate adaptation is not solely an environmental problem. It will touch on the economy, infrastructure, health, emergency services, and more. In 2019-20, Environment Lethbridge convened a series of 12 different stakeholder focus groups around climate adaptation, looking at a cross-section of projected impacts, ongoing initiatives, and gaps. Some of the impacts that were identified included things like increased snow load on buildings, emergency response to flood and fire events, decreased air quality, as well as a range of others. One of the things that we would propose as a priority going forward is a community-wide climate adaptation plan under the auspices of the MDP that can both engage the community in planning for a climate future, as well as creating a clear, comprehensive pathway for both the city and the community as a whole. Secondly, I want to touch on environmental stewardship and education. The city has been a strong supporter of working in partnership in this area through the Helen Schuler Nature Center, but working in partnership with groups like Environment Lethbridge, Old Man Watershed Council, to really expand the reach of environmental stewardship and education in the city. And we certainly would hope that that would continue into the future. Finally, to reiterate what Brom had said about the River Valley, the Old Man River Valley is a jewel for Lethbridge, and we should be exceedingly proud of past and current efforts to conserve that area. There's a lot of work that can be done in terms of how we manage and restore control for invasive species, find a balance between ecological and recreational uses in that area. And so we look forward to seeing that reflected in the MDP. Finally, as an overarching comment, we'd really encourage the inclusion of specific targets and goals in the MDP so that we can measure our progress in the future when we're looking back in 10 or 20 years to see how the MDP has served our community. And on behalf of Environment Lethbridge, I look forward to working with the city to help make Lethbridge a leader in environmental sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mearns?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This one must be what it feels like in a football arena, hey, when there's only a few of you and everyone else is virtually up there. Well, it's good to see the ones that are here, and thank you for joining us online. Thank you for the invitation to provide some comments on the update on the MDP. Our members design and develop land that becomes our neighborhoods. Our builders and industry support members build the houses that become our homes. That forms our community, and that makes Lethbridge. They are also large employers and economic generators. And as an industry that plays a large role in investing and building our city, most, if not all, policy sections directly impact the residential construction industry. So we appreciate the opportunity to provide some input on the MDP. The MDP has laid out an exciting vision for our city. It is ambitious, and it should be. In the next 20 years, the way we grow must reflect the diverse ways the residents of Lethbridge want to live, work, and play, but also invest and build businesses. This calls for a wide range of housing types across a diverse area of the city, making smart use of existing infrastructure, and ensuring that development is financially, socially, and environmentally responsible. We need to be careful not to execute the plan in a way that undermines affordability and the benefits of housing attainability for as much of the population as we can. Lethbridge is known as an affordable community, and it's its competitive advantage in attracting and retaining residents to our city. Today, there are two housing policies objectives that I'd like to highlight. Under the housing policy section, specifically development pattern and infield, the objective of these policies is to minimize the urban footprint of Lethbridge by using land more efficiently. I focus on this objective as land efficiency is key in achieving many of the objectives throughout the MDP. Over the last number of years, the amount of land used for public infrastructure, design standards such as sidewalks, roads, multimodal networks, utility corridors, stormwater ponds, and public open space has slowly been increasing, leading to a reduction in the amount of developable land and tax base for the city, and putting pressure on affordability and land efficiency. The cost associated with increasing public footprint should be carefully examined and evaluated on a continuous basis to achieve the objectives in the NDP. In minimizing the urban footprint, the policy needs to be flexible enough to address market demand. The plan should be reviewed regularly to ensure we are building a city where people will be able to live. The plan needs to be flexible enough to facilitate growth and not dictate where it can or cannot occur. What impact will the pandemic have on how comfortable people are using public transit? With more people working from home and not traveling to employment centres, do we need to orientate the city differently? Will we want to build to accommodate, or how will the population want us to build to accommodate for a different work-home lifestyle? We don't know. Another area that requires careful consideration and management when considering minimizing the urban footprint is the cost of dramatically increasing density in redevelopment areas. The necessary improved infrastructure, including sewers, water line, and roads, will require significant investment. The true cost of adding density needs to be fully examined when executing this policy. Next, affordability, accessibility, and supportive housing initiative. The objectives of this policy is to explore options for partnership and financial incentives for the development of the full spectrum of housing choice. Supportive and affordable housing types should not be a blanket target number, but executed through a thoughtful and strategic placement, most effectively in locations that are supported not only by transit, by other amenities like proximity to green spaces, schools, and other employment centres. This can be achieved in greenfield and infield. Having incentives and grants to mitigate the cost will be important in realizing the development of affordable, accessible, and supportive units. This investment can also be used to revitalize strategic areas of the city with redevelopment. As I mentioned earlier, the MDP is a high-level plan that presents a bold vision for Lethbridge. However, it does not provide information on moving from aspiration to action. We believe the best way forward will be having an open, constructive conversation about how the plan will be interpreted and implemented. As those decisions are made, we hope the interpretation and implementation of the plan will be flexible enough to ensure its success. It's important to not lose sight of market conditions, consumer demand, and previous infrastructure investments in planning for Lethbridge's future. We look forward to playing our part in building a vibrant, economically prosperous, and well-designed city where all people can fully participate in community life. It will be through close coordination and agreement between the municipality and the industry that we succeed. We are committed to being your partners in achieving the vision for Lethbridge. So thank you.
Are there any questions for our presenters from the City Council? Actually, before I'll get questions, it's thank you very much to you three for doing the work and coming and speaking to us today about your vision for Lethbridge and your contribution to the MDP. Ms. Gehring, how do we take presentations like this and meld them into to the MDP process and to the finished product?
So, Councillor Miyashiro, staff are watching the presentation today and taking some notes. We will, I'm not sure if we'll have a check back from actual engagement that we did to where the policies are, but initially I think we've done pretty well today in capturing a lot of what the presenters have said in terms of the policy framework that we've been working on. So,
thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you to all the presenters. Appreciate the information. Appreciate the consideration and participation as well. Ms. Gehring, first on the environment, I completely agree with the presenters when talking about the statement that air and water are not isolated to the city of Lethbridge. So it does require more of a collective, more of a community, a broader community conversation about these protections or these considerations. How does the MDP address sort of the cross-jurisdictional issues of water and air? Do we have a strategy laid out in terms of how we're going to deal with this with the county, with our neighbors in the Blood Reserve, neighboring communities? Those types of conversations when we're talking about air quality and water quality.
So that's a great question, Councillor Kaufman. So considering the MDP is a high-level document, it won't be laying out specific strategy, but it does give direction in terms of working through existing organizations such as the Old Man Watershed Council, which is a regional group, which we are a partner in terms of looking at water quality. In terms of airshed, that is something that staff have been involved in with Alberta Environment. So there will be references to perhaps how that could be explored. It is a different sort of a situation for Lethbridge and other airsheds in Alberta. There are corporate donations given to the airshed. So we don't have a really big oil and gas presence here in the Southern Alberta airshed, which Lethbridge is a part of. So yeah, we'll have to explore that further in the document.
Thank you. Recognizing that everything is a priority, and when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. But how are we going to ensure then through the MDP that the conversation, the consideration will exist, will occur within our organization, especially when we're making decisions that are going to have airshed or watershed impacts? How do we ensure that those conversations are actually going to exist or the considerations will be made?
So in terms of municipal decisions, in terms of approvals, Councillor Kaufman?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so Alberta Environment really has the governing legislation in terms of air quality. So in terms of any approvals we do as a municipality, they are subject to Alberta Environment control, right? So it is difficult for us to override any provincial regulations that may exist. I think the one thing that we can do is just continue to work together, establish some partnerships, and explore the idea of an airshed a little bit more fulsomely.
Thank you. So our environmental standards are minimum requirements of Alberta Environment. So any changes to their standards will change our standards upwards or downwards. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have additional questions, but I'll step out of line and buzz back in. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Mayor Spearman?
Thank you. We did get written submissions from two of the organizations. Mr. Barber, is your presentation also available to the city in writing? Okay, thank you. With that, no, that's my simple question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you very much. This question is for Bridget Mearns, if I could. Bridget, just thank you. Again, thanks to everyone for their presentations today. I was just, I'm curious, what is the marketplace like right now for eco-friendly homes in the city? And are you working, is there anything in any plans for looking at an area that has predominantly eco-friendly type homes?
So the new homes are by nature already I think 85% more efficient than older homes. The industry increasingly gets more energy efficient as it moves along by nature. There's always things that they're looking at. We do have a couple of specific builders that focus on energy efficient homes, and net zero is the qualification that we use from a home builder's perspective in our association. We have a number of builders that build to that. They're increasingly looking at ways on how to make homes more energy efficient. Things from using different venting versus also 3-ply windows versus, so there's all sorts of things the industry is constantly doing and staying ahead of trying to be energy efficient. One thing that we're doing as an industry, I haven't reported back on this, but perhaps this is a good time to do it. If you recall back, I guess a year ago, the city had put a surcharge on waste product that could be recyclable. And it was, so our industry took a look at that, and they wanted to be able to take that seriously and look at the way of diverting what they were normally putting in waste to the recycling stream. The two largest waste streams are drywall and lumber. Our builders who are building in subdivisions here in Lethbridge have committed to removing their waste bins, which used to collect everything, to only providing drywall during drywall stage and lumber bins during lumber. And what this has done is what used to go into the landfill is now being diverted into these recycling streams. And this is I can't quantify it, but I can tell you that it has diverted a significant amount of construction waste from our landfill. And this is a commitment, a code of conduct our builders have signed and agreed to.
Ray, do you, I'm just curious, and perhaps you don't know the answer to this. When builders are trying to create zero energy homes, has that become somewhat cost prohibitive for the builder? I mean, obviously they'd have to pass it on to the buyer, but is there an additional cost for a builder?
You know, I don't know specifically, but I think anecdotally, yes, there still is a premium, but I think that's getting better and better. Part of that is design. Some of that can be captured in how a home is designed or situated. And, but I think, unfortunately, at this time, it still is a bit of a premium. But I can qualify that and get back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you. For Ms. Mearns, if I can, please. Thank you. When you talk about the way that we grow, the way that we develop, you've identified some concerns in terms of direction. When we're talking about sort of the broader policy conversations, are there specific ideals that your membership would like us to be addressing or considering?
Well, I think one of the big things I identified in my remarks was the land efficiency. So making sure that we're using land the most efficient way in developable land, but also looking at levels of service and how we're designing the city, maybe even how we are integrating parks into our design. The point is that a lot of that has to move forward with conversation and really looking at innovative ways of thinking about how we design and build our city. But land efficiency obviously would be one of them. And looking at the cost of land, which continues to escalate, which makes it less and less affordable for people to attain ownership in our city.
Absolutely, thank you. Are there, obviously there are other models, there are other ways of considering these things. Does Build have, I don't know what the word is. Is there something that that through your work at Build locally or provincially or nationally can provide options for us to be considering some of these things outside of the framework in which we currently operate? Are there different ways of considering these things in the larger governing documents?
I'm trying to think specifically if there are specific policies. I think just general principles of looking at cost value and value engineering and making sure that when projects are moving forward, that they're examined, one, for is the cost right? Is it still necessary to be doing that? Are there other more cost-efficient ways to do it? I think it's more a principle of how we're looking at growing and what we want to accomplish in the projects that we move forward.
Okay, so yeah, so something, and I'll take the example of, because we had this at CDC, take an example of complete streets. I could see complete streets, well, it may have a, you know, there may be something in there that we're looking at for a different type of community experience, broadening opportunity. At the same time, that's going to be increasing costs for developers and builders because of the reduction of space on available land, the infrastructure required for multimodal pathways, things of that nature.
I think it's understanding all of that. So where can we integrate the principles of complete street in a way that is already using our existing infrastructure? Are we looking at the cost effects of doing what's out there? In the complete streets, there are areas where the right-of-ways have actually become smaller, which is great. So there's some really great principles in there. But it's important that we have those conversations, we do that analysis. If we do this, then what? Is it that we're trying to achieve? And maybe it's an acceptable thing to do, but we have to have the conversation and make sure that we're looking at all of those things. If you put, for example, a bike lane, then that makes front driveways impossible. So is there a different way of designing that particular neighborhood that's not affected by that? So it's all a big puzzle, and there's different pieces to it, but it's making sure that every piece is examined and discussed, and cost analysis is definitely one of them.
Okay, thank you. If I can, just a final question, Deputy Mayor, to Ms. Gehring. Thank you, Ms. Mayor. So, Ms. Gehring, then, hearing that and sort of in consideration with that, understanding, as we all recognize, an MDP is a high-level document. Are we creating this in a way that we don't attach ourselves or assign ourselves to one permanent guiding philosophy, that we have the flexibility within the document to look at alternatives? If we're going down Avenue A, we have the opportunity to switch to Avenue B if we want, or Avenue C.
So that would actually depend on, I guess, which section of the document we're talking about. We have done quite a bit of work in some areas, and so that may be something that council discusses during actually the review of the document itself. If you feel that perhaps we have gotten too specific, that is feedback you would have to tell us, and then we would look at perhaps amending the language. I'm not sure we would want to, at this point, change some certain things. Perhaps giving it to council to review first is a better idea through that public hearing process. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? I see no other questions. I have a resolution from Councillor Croson. Municipal Development Plan Review Stakeholder Comments. Be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee receive this presentation as information, and further be it resolved that administration be directed to consider this information when drafting municipal development plan policies, and further be it resolved that Maureen Gehring, Brian Barber, Kathleen Shepherd, and Bridget Mearns be thanked for their presentation. Councillor Croson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you all so much for your presentation. This is a huge document, and it's not one that we do very often. So it's very kind of you on your days like this when you're at work to come in and present your information to us so that we can have a better understanding of how the public is viewing this document and make this document better. So with that, unless there's any questions or debate, I'll call the question.
There are none. Question has been called. Any opposed? There being none, that's carried. Thank you. Next up, item 4.2. Trevor Butler and Vicki Bennett, the Intelligent Community, or the Digital Transformation Master Plan.
We're okay to begin, or? Okay. Thank you, members of council, Mayor Spearman and Deputy Mayor Shiro, for the opportunity to be back in council to talk about what we refer to as our Digital Transformation Master Plan. And I also acknowledge Ms. Bennett, who is joining remotely to participate in our meeting today. Next slide, please. Today in our discussion, I'll overview what we define as a digital transformation master plan. We'll talk about the inputs, the engagements we had with our community, various members of administration as well, the findings which came out of those inquiries and that consultation, along with recommendations to move forward with this particular master plan. I'll conclude my thoughts talking about what we're actively pursuing today. When we began the Intelligent Community Initiative in 2014 and 2015, we had an initiative known as the Online Services Delivery Strategy that was targeted to begin in the 3rd and 4th year. And as we began that work, we started to understand how citizen expectations are being shaped by the multi-billion-dollar corporations that are described as the acronym of FANG, which for those who may not be aware is the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, the large digital natives that we ourselves and our citizens, our customers are. And trying to answer that question of how can we as a municipality provide and meet those changing citizen expectations and customer expectations without the billion-dollar budget that these large digital native organizations hold. We also started to learn that the vast majority of the viewership coming to our web properties is not on a traditional computer, but is on a mobile device, which has a smaller screen, which has a different interface, and which travels with our citizens. We wanted the ability to reduce inefficiencies and look beyond just electronic processes, but to decompose those processes, to reconstruct them into digital processes, so that we could further produce efficiencies for our citizens. And of course, we learned that our citizens don't see the city as a series of business units. They see us as one city and want that consistency as they interact with us. We wanted to focus on innovation to improve our operations and to use smart city solutions to become more efficient. We wanted to be able to look at those concepts of artificial intelligence, robotics, process automation, and even predictive analytics. We wanted to look at what was the future of public service looking at digital. Thank you. As we began this work, there was a team that engaged with us that we've referred to as our steering committee. Our executive and corporate sponsor, Mr. Hawkins. We're also joined by individuals from infrastructure, from 311, from corporate communications, and others across the city. We partnered with an external organization to help lead this. From CGI, became our partner, who helped draft and do a lot of the analytical work behind this master plan. And we recognize Mr. Chuck McKinnon and his team helping us get us where we are today. As we began down this road, we wanted to take in a series of inputs versus just working internally. We worked with our citizens and our public. We offered a general public survey, which gave our citizens an opportunity to engage, to share their feedback, to share their pain points. At the mayor's request, we had targeted stakeholder interviews, with many of which were people that were already on our Intelligent Community Steering Committee. And we participated in the 2019 community conversation to provide another mechanism in which we could hear the voice of our citizen, of how they wanted to engage with the city online. We worked with city administration, particularly the senior management team, through what was known as an ambitions workshop. We worked with every one of our business unit managers to understand where they were going with their individual services that they were responsible for. And once again, we reached out to all of our employees to hear where their pinpoints might be. We also wanted to take an analytical approach with the data that we already had. And so we looked at 311 trends, our Lethbridge.ca trends, and we also looked at comparable municipalities, which are different than what we normally see, as we wanted them to be less than 500,000 in population, and we wanted them to have a digital public strategy. There are a number of key findings which are on the screen and available in the reports as well, which ultimately pointed towards a citizen dashboard that was personalized and specific to them, that they could get real-time information and engage with the city in the way that worked for them, which is also what we heard from our stakeholders, those targeted interviews. We learned from our analytical work that about 60% of our traffic coming to the city through web properties is on mobile devices, which means that it's a different experience on mobile. It's not a situation where you can consume a PDF and print that off. We also learned that a significant referral source that we have is our digital media, which our corporate communications runs, which brings people to our Lethbridge.ca site. There were a number of other findings, specifically around where people are going when they come to our site. It is normal that the default landing page has a significant percentage. What's key in here is that 4 of our top 6 pages that people are going to is to consume some kind of a schedule or some kind of a calendar, and they're trying to consume that on their mobile devices. Most of those calendars and schedules are PDF documents that require you to download and print them off. As mentioned, we also went and looked at comparable municipalities. There's 7 of them that are proposed inside of the master plan, and you can see where they fit on a maturity from absent, exploring, early adoption, or enabling, and across the 5 different areas where municipalities typically invest with their digital maturity. we'll go to the next page. Yep, thank you. The key to the recommendations coming forward is to begin working with citizen at the center of how we deliver these services. As the citizen looks at the city to transact with us, they don't see different departments. They want to be able to book a swimmer skating lesson. They want to be able to apply for a license or transact, regardless of the department that might be in. It's important to note as well that there isn't an average citizen. If we can go to the next page, please. We've done a significant amount of work to create what's known as personas, which are composites of various demographics and fictional narratives of real-life individuals that encompass a set of behaviors, goals, needs, and pain points, so we can understand the needs of different groups of citizens, because there isn't an average citizen that we can respond to. Each one of these personas as well has an accompanying journey as they try and interact with the city to consume services. They have pain points, they have needs, and they have struggles as they try and work and consume the services at the city. These personas are also important so we can understand not just how they interact today, but how they desire to interact and what are the most important services they need to consume and how do they consume them. And then as we deliver these services, these are some of the personas that we can plan towards delivering our services to. Next page, please. As in building any kind of a building, there's a foundation that we need to set first before we start looking at what the ultimate goal, the HALO project, as the study points out, which is a personalized one-stop shop for all digital services for our citizens. There are 5 foundational projects that are important to understand underneath of there so that we have the foundation to move forward. Many organizations have been talking about their digital plan. They have for years. There's always been barriers along the way. And if there's one good thing coming out of COVID, that has pointed out the need for a digital plan to move forward at our services for when they may not be able to be accessible in person. Next slide, please. Currently, as far as our next steps, where we're working today is on actually the first 3 foundational projects. The first one is a digital service standard, which will really define what this portal would look like and what all of our web properties will look like, so digitally and online we are seen as one city and it is a coherent experience for our citizens versus individual experiences based on business units. The second piece is a project on automating our IT infrastructure, which is work to assess how we run our IT infrastructure today so that we can transform that to have the level of agility that is needed to develop a portal and to be able to move that forward successively. The third one, which isn't on this list, is a number of 2 initiatives in which we're using to develop that agile approach internally as we move our services forward. We do acknowledge and bring forward that it is likely that we would see a new initiative in a future operating budget as we get closer to delivering this citizen portal. That is the presentation and thoughts that I have for you today. Thank you for your time and your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Question from, can't see that one. Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Butler and Ms. Bennett, for the work and for the information. Appreciate it. When you talk about moving forward, prior to any of that, are you setting up a framework for data policy, data governance?
That is a very important point, especially around the 2 projects that I didn't talk about, which is around address and identification, so that we can both uniquely identify an address and a citizen themselves, which is important. And to your question, that's a key part of this initiative, is to look at the data that we have at the city and to place governance around that, to identify who the owners of that information is and how that can be represented to our citizens.
Thank you. I guess in my mind, in terms of the process, would that not be the first conversation that you have? So it's clearly understood by everyone, internal as well as external, even when you're sort of coming to these digital service standards, everybody knows what the protections, what the concerns, what the level of data handling is going to be. Like, would that not be your first conversation?
It would be, I would say that it would be very closely related to when we start looking at procuring a portal, and it would be considered some of this internal foundational preparatory work, particularly around governance. The data side is around the privacy side. What can be shared, what can't be shared?
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have a clear understanding of that right now, or is there further exploration?
No, there's quite a bit of further exploration as this plan really points out the direction we feel we should go, and more work's going to be needed on the data and the privacy governance side of things.
Okay, but that's okay. I guess I'm just trying to understand this from a I'm hoping it's not a philosophical perspective, but it's more of a practical perspective. If we're talking about people's information, and that can be everything as you've identified, from bus schedules to paying for things and whatnot. People are accessing the website, so there is going to be the ability to record what they're doing. We're going to be holding data, or collecting data, holding data, possibly analyzing data. Would we not want to establish some fundamental parameters around data first before we get into exercises on sort of digital service standards?
Just to clarify, the digital service standard is really around the look and the feel. The data governance is a separate piece altogether, which would need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Further to that, then, because you produce an enormous amount of data, so it's not just the fact that you're looking at privacy issues, but you're also looking at more infrastructure in order to capture the data and manipulate it. So in that big picture, you're looking at developing like a data center of some kind to store all the data off-site, so it's not going to get, can't be affected by weather, can't be affected by disaster, those kinds of things?
Yeah, that is a piece to look at, keeping in mind that there's usually on a dashboard or a citizen portal, it's the services they're trying to consume. And that's what this automating IT infrastructure project starts to look at, is where should this data be held? How should it be protected? What are the controls that we should have in place? Who gets to access what? And how do we identify that the citizen is that citizen that they say they are? And so that's where we have to look at our systems. And for example, I talked about an agile development approach. Typically, we follow what's called a waterfall approach, which is a whole bunch of planning and then everything cascades from there. We're proposing a different approach where we're using what's called a scrum, where we're going to develop the minimum feature set that would come forward, and that would be progressively been developed. And every time we do that, we have to look at the system. So as an example, if we were looking at transit schedules, we would need to look at all the systems that contribute to that. Where are they at? Where should they be at? So they have the appropriate level of resiliency and reliability so that they can be used in this particular service. One of the examples inside of there is many of our systems hold address information or individual information so they know who's consuming their service. Part of this work in those preparatory projects is to look at the address registry and the ID registry so that that can be consolidated into one place. And of course, you have to look at the resiliency to make sure that that data is going to be available.
I have one more thing since no one else is out there. In your demographic descriptions, and I noticed when I first saw this, you have the demographic categories and then you have business owner / dad. Can you tell me what led you to that characterization of that demographic group? You don't mention mom or grandma or grandpa.
Yeah, that was one that kind of stuck out to me as well as we first went into that. And all of these are based off of the people who responded to surveys. So there was some demographic information collected, right, which then led to forming what these personas are. And I recognize there's that one that slash is a little bit different.
Because it makes it sound like you're only considering business owners as dad and not mom.
That's correct, and that wouldn't be true inside of there. We're looking at those that own small businesses and operate them regardless of that second term that's there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaufman? Carlson? Sorry, Councillor Carlson? I think. Is that, no, it's Kaufman. Kaufman,
Nope,
are you up
it's
there?
Kaufman.
Okay, go.
Is that me, Deputy Mayor, or is that Councillor Carlson?
No, that's you. I can't see the last name from where I'm sitting. Oh, I can now. if I look at the right screen. Go ahead,
Okay.
Jeff Kaufman.
Thank you, and I'm just trying to consider this from the perspective of the protection of public information, public data, and again, maybe it's maybe a little deeper than what you're talking about here, but it's about the protection of the data that gets collected. It's protection of the information. When you see a governance structure, Mr. Butler, how do you what are you doing in terms of consideration of who has ultimate access or authority over that data and that information?
Right. So one of the roles that I have is to sit on a committee known as NSIP, which is the National CIO Subcommittee on Information Protection, where this is exactly what we're talking at. And what Councillor Kaufman, what they're recommending as a governance structure is one that is considered as the federal model, where we classify information for confidentiality, for availability, and for integrity, which gets us into areas as far as protected levels A, Bs, and Cs on what can be shared and what can't. And that's some of the framework that we'll need to set up, particularly as we're assessing the data that would be available in this type of a service. And that's the framework that both the provincial folks that I work with in our province and the federal government recommend that you move to, so that document can be classified in its level of how it should be available and who should access it. The important piece that they've recommended is there's many jurisdictions that have attempted to go down that road as all the data we have. The recommendation coming from those bodies is to set up that framework, which is known as the federal model, and then to look at the data for each iteration that we're going to make available in a citizen portal and review that data at that time, which then answers that question of what can be available and what can't be available. And what we've been finding from the federal government is that there's controls currently available to make what's known as confidential level B data accessible through cloud services and to citizens.
Okay, thank you. So when we go back then to the digital service standard, when you're looking at just creating kind of this one look, this one accessibility, this one sort of approach to how we're providing these portals, these services to our residents, when I go down your actionable steps, again, not to push it, but to push it, where does this governance overlay come in? Is this a concurrent conversation, or is this a foundational conversation?
Yeah, I would suggest it's a foundational conversation that we haven't really ripped the layers off of that yet. Because we have to go through some of that data governance and data security side of things before we start making that service available to our citizens. So definitely a key item inside of there.
Will the next updater report be addressing that then as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor.
If there are no more questions, I have a resolution by Councillor Kaufman on the Digital Transformation Master Plan. Be it resolved that the Community Issues Committee receive this presentation as information, and further be it resolved that Trevor Butler and Vicky Bennett be thanked for the presentation. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you again, Mr. Butler and Ms. Bennett, for the work that you've done on this. I think probably the most not the most significant, but probably the thing that is the slide that stands out is the one with the decision regarding not moving forward and the big black COVID ball coming at you. COVID has certainly demonstrated that we are not prepared for so many things, and we have to move beyond that, and we have to get our systems and structures in place for the next issue that's going to affect us all locally, broader community, or worldwide. And moving to a master plan of this nature is going to create some of that oversight. And I think at the moment, CIC is excited to hear from you and want to see what the direction it's going to head. So call for the question.
Thank you. Any opposed? That is carried. I now have a resolution from Councillor Parker, a closed session omnibus report. Be it resolved that Community Issues Committee directed the closed meeting discussions, reports, presentations, and documents with respect to 6.1 advocacy matter, 6.2 land matter remain confidential pursuant to Section 16 business interests of a third party, Section 24, advice from officials, and 25, business and other interests of a public body of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have nothing else to add to that, so I've just called the question.
Question's been called. Any opposed? There are none. That is carried. I have a resolution from Councillor Morrow for adjournment that we do now adjourn the Community Issues Committee meeting until Monday, December 7th, 2020. Councillor Morrow.
Question.
Question's been called. Any opposed? There are none. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.